Let's talk for a few minutes about situated cognition as a theory of learning. Um, it's not that well named. I mean, situated cognition makes you think that this is probably part of cognitive learning theory, but it's really closer aligned to constructivism, and particularly social constructivism and Vygotsky and all of that. Um, I wish they'd rename it, but they didn't. so, and it's very well known now by its name, situated cognition. So let's just run with that. The idea is that learning and cognition thinking is embedded in the social context in which it happens. Okay, so it's not terribly named. It just doesn't get all that into the name. So learning from this perspective is a process of internalizing knowledge, and it's discovered and transmitted and experienced and all of that through interaction and collaboration. So you can see that whole social aspect comes blending into it pretty quickly. No surprise that from this perspective, focus isn't on an individual. It's on the group and how the group interacts, with the focus on sociocultural settings and activities and people in those settings. Now we think that knowledge through this perspective is accrued through lived practices of people in a society. Think about it. We learn stuff all the time just by interacting with each other and behaving with each other in a society. Think about how you see people who've never driven in your city or town, and when they first come there and how they drive around. You'll see that they learn over time that some of their practices just don't work in the settings where they are, and so they have to relearn and adjust what they do, and that's a very social and interactive kind of process. And because of this, you can't divide a cultural system from the meaning of the actions that happen there. So let's think about political parties as examples of situated cognition. You have whole cultures that go around being a liberal or a New Democrat or even a conservative. But these are cultural systems, and people interact in those, and what they do in those systems, you can't divide them from the culture in which they're embedded. And I think you see that whenever there's an election afoot. Learning from this perspective is realized through participation in communities of practice, they're called. Now, you've probably heard that term a lot. It's been bandied about quite a bit in education. Just about every time somebody wants to do something, they say, let's form a community of practice around this. Well, I think you'll find with our discussions of other kinds of communities, that communities are really difficult to form or create or cause to happen, but they do emerge from the right kinds of situations and contexts. The idea of a community of practice isn't that it's imposed, but rather that it's co-constitutive. Nobody gets out alive. Good old Hunter Thompson, eh? The idea is that we all participate in how it's formed, how it acts, what we learn from it. All of those things are co-constitutive. So you can't separate the people from the community. You can't say the community is an entity separate from the people who are contributing to it. That means that there's a very special role for a group of people called JPFs. Okay? JPF, just plain folks. People who, in organizations and in institutions, situationally embedded in those, they're contributing to, and often it's the JPFs who will see life in a different way than the people who are trying to run the organization. So think of it from the perspective of people working at Walmart. okay? There may be a whole collection of people who work there day in and day out, and they have to deal with management coming in and changing things in the organization and changing things even in the store, at the store level, and doing that sort of thing. All kinds of processes change on them. These people see what happens on the floor with people who are coming through the door, and they have a tremendous amount to offer in terms of knowledge and experience to that organization. So we see the role of JPFs being somewhat elevated in real communities of practice. When you get those mixed, diverse groups together, you see that there are all kinds of people who can make all kinds of contributions in all kinds of ways. Now we also know, and think about your own lives, that you participate in a bunch of different communities, don't you? I mean, it's not just like, okay, I'm a guitar player, so I'm a musician and I work with musicians and I think about music all the time and that's all I do. Now, yeah, you may be obsessed with all of that, and that may play a huge role in your life, but you probably also have other communities in which you participate. You might have a political group, you might have a church group that you mess around with, you might be teaching at the same time, and so you have your staff and even your division operating together in particular ways. So you have, and your families. Families can act as communities too, and communities of practice in many ways because they're learning how to do things together. So you have lots of different ways these things can be expressed, so lots of different communities we can express what we know in, because we know we're diverse people. Now, how do we participate in those? Well, the way we act in a community of practice can change depending on which community of practice we're in and how much skill and how comfortable we are in our roles and our own skins and with the people we're interacting with. All those kinds of things come into play. But it means that we can play a lot of different roles. In some, we may be in an apprenticeship role. We may be learning how to do something. We may be just coming along for the ride, or taking the first steps into something. I'm guessing that some of you have never before, this class, let's say, moderated a discussion, an online discussion. Perhaps this is one of the times that you've first had a chance to do that. And so you're learning from other people how to do that all the time. By seeing what happened first. I mean, luckily some people go first and teach us, show us the way, and then in our apprenticeship role, we're keeping an eye on that. We're learning all the time from other people about what works, what doesn't work, what offends people, what makes them happy, what gets them involved, all those kinds of things. Then we also have a mentorship role. One person could step in and say, you know, I've got a whole lot of experience with this, and I'll be happy to show you the ropes. So obviously, you can, in some places where you've got particular expertise, you can come in and play the role of mentor. Whereas in another community, you might be an apprentice. Now, those roles that you play when you're messing around with your participation in learning communities can be expressed in not just different roles, but kind of what Wenger called learning trajectories. So in other words, think about a learning community, a community of practice, being a sphere, okay? Basketball, volleyball. And you're situated somewhere in that sphere, okay? Now, it might be peripheral. You might be in the atmosphere and orbiting that ball, watching what's going on. I mean, in some places we call them lurkers, and some spectators. It's a little kinder, isn't it? But the idea is that you're tentative, and your actual participation isn't that active yet in the group. You're kind of circling, hovering, orbiting that sphere, and seeing where you can penetrate effectively, and whether you should, whether you want to. Now, at some point, you probably make a choice to get closer, to do something with the group, and that's where you become an insider, more and more of an insider by becoming inbound. So you move inbound and eventually become an insider, okay? So you take your first tentative steps, you're welcomed by people, you gain some expertise through your apprenticeship roles that you've played, then you tentatively take a little mentorship with somebody on a little part, somebody who's new to the group, and pretty soon you find yourself, you've gone inbound now and you're on the inside of the group, okay? Now you can also then be on the boundary of the group, you know, and just stay on kind of the inside, but at the edge of that group all the time. People will know you're there, but you have kind of a loose grip on it. You know, you haven't really dug into it. This isn't going to be a group you invest a great deal in, but it's something you're kind of interested in, and so you want to hover around. You like these people, and you want to learn from them. And occasionally, you'll contribute something that will help people learn too. So you can have a boundary trajectory, and just staying there. That's different from being on the periphery and being on the outside of it, looking in. Because in a boundary organization, you're in it. You're just not very deeply in it, but you're staying in about the same place. Or you can be outbound. I mean, that all happens. That happens to most of us. In many of the communities we're in, we go in, we invest for a while, we tire of it, and or we've made the contribution we can make, and we've learned from the group what we can learn. And then we find that we're moving away from the group after that. And so that's a very typical role we see in communities of practice, that people will go through several of those different learning trajectories, not all of them necessarily, but they will certainly express more than one in most cases during their life with a community of practice. Now, there's an ecological perspective of perception, ecological, psychological psychology of perception when we look at all of this. Think about the spaces within which people work and how we perceive those spaces within which we work. So let's take our own class for an example. We're an online class. We engage with each other in a lot of different ways, don't we? There's a whole bunch of different types of experiences, the content experiences. There are discussions, there's videos that we do. We get together for video conference events. We meet with other people. We do all kinds of stuff during the class. And so there are affordances built into the space that allow us to do that, that encourage us to do that, in some cases require us to do it. But there they are. I mean, they are affordances, and it allows you then to be involved in particular ways. If those affordances are different or they don't exist, it's going to influence how you behave and how you perceive your activity in that group. Because people move within a physical and conceptual space, don't they? I mean, think about what we do here again. We're in a conceptual space all the time. We're thinking about right now, we're in a conceptual space, aren't we? We're thinking about, I hope you're still with me on this, we're thinking about communities of practice. Well, it's a conceptual space that we're in. We're thinking, ruminating about that, thinking about when we've been in those before. But it's also a physical space we're in. You're either viewing this on your iPhone or you've got it sitting next to you in the back seat of your car, and you turned it on because it wouldn't be in the front seat because you would be looking at it if you were driving, and you're listening to it, and you're not even looking at my wonderful face through the whole thing. We operate probably differently depending on what that physical space is. Even if it's a virtual space, it's a physical space for us. Is it on a desktop? Is it in a controlled environment? Is your Is your dog barking? Is the television on in the other room? All those kinds of things contribute to the overall physical space within which we operate as a community of practice. And we're not always aware of what those structures are that are influencing us. Like, you know, I've made no secret. I sit out here in my backyard. Here it is, a lovely fall day. My neighbors just came out on the second floor on their deck over there. I don't know if you can hear them talking, but got some people over there. We had all kinds of weird things happen over time as we shoot these videos that become part of the overall structure, but you may not even be that aware of them. If you're concentrating on one thing, selective perception from cognitive learning theory would say that we're going to selectively perceive one thing over another, and we'll probably miss a lot of things in the periphery as a result. That's a good thing. Okay, learning theory from this perspective has to start with the culture in which the learners reside. The idea is that you can't separate the culture from the learning and the learners, right? And so the theory and the understanding of what happens has to start with the culture within which it resides. So we look at the culture of ETAD, we look at the culture of online learning, we look at the culture of this particular LMS that we use. Okay. Now, from a critical pedagogical point of view, if we were going to criticize things pedagogically from different perspectives, we would do cross-cultural comparisons often. We say, well, yeah, let's compare how we work in this kind of a setting with how we work in a small class seminar when we're all face-to-face. Let's talk about how we operate with each other when we're in a staff room and working together with other teachers as compared to a division meeting when we're broken into other kinds of groups. Now, do you hear? I've got some construction going on about 2 houses down. See how you didn't even notice that? Didn't see it, did you? When we do those cross-cultural comparisons, it's often really interesting to have a good close look at whose knowledge is valued and important and acted on. When we look at different learning environments for people, who has a voice and who is silenced, and an entire range in between, right? And how are voices afforded? How is knowledge built? How is some knowledge valued over other knowledge? How are those things negotiated and built? All very important when we're thinking about things from a situated cognition point of view. So the basic premises of situated cognition theory are that we're social beings, okay, that knowledge, knowing stuff, is a matter of competence with respect to valued enterprises, like the fact that I play a little guitar or I know how to make wine. That would be valued by some people and not others. So in some situations, I might be a mentor. In other situations, it would be completely irrelevant and useless to know those kinds of things. So competence, but with respect to valued enterprises. And then knowing is a matter of active engagement with the world. If you know something, it's how you engage the world with that. Knowing something entirely internally, hermit-like, monk-like, is not as understood or expressed in situated cognition theory. They don't say that it doesn't exist. They just say it's not an important part of how they look at learning and how they try to understand it. And then meaning becomes our ability to experience the world and engaging it meaningfully. It's ultimately what learning is to produce, okay? Our ability to experience the world. Can we grow in our ability to experience the world in rich and wonderful ways? So think if you became a poet, and over time you take the time to learn poetry and memorize a bunch of it and share it with other people, and all of you get together and you have a poetry club and you learn all that kind of stuff. The idea is that then it enriches your life in some way. It allows you to experience the world in a different way. So situated cognition doesn't mean it has to be something you can do. You can just perform. It can be something you know that's valued, that's carried forward. And I think that that's an important difference than some of the theories that we've looked at. Look at behaviorism. I mean, if they couldn't care less about what's in your head, only care about what you do. Okay? So think about what are some of the epistemological underpinnings of situated cognition. What are the things that drive it? Is it better explained from an idealist perspective or pragmatic perspective? Think that through. Start thinking about the communities of practice to which you belong, and how some of these ideas. Where are you? Describe your participation in them. What's your learning trajectory? Are you inbound or are you outbound? Are you on the boundary or are you on the periphery? Where are you with those kinds of things? And then how does situated cognition then influence what we do in our classrooms, both as students and as teachers? How is it that if we believe that learning is constructed this way, if we believe that these are important ideas to how we co-construct knowledge, how then must we respond when we work with each other? Is it enough for us to buy into some of the traditional modes of teaching and pedagogy? Are there other things that emerge as more important as a result?